Hello and welcome to part 2 of Driving Microsoft Teams Adoption, where we are going to be covering Teams meeting best practices. So one of the challenges that we have faced over the last couple of years of doing training sessions with different clients and prospective and community members is they learn about all these different features of Office 365 and Teams, but then they raise their hand and say, okay, great, well, what's next? How do I drive adoption with my team? No pun intended. This is part 2 of one of the best ways we've found to take the lessons and the information you've learned about what Microsoft Teams and Office 365 is capable of accomplishing and applying it to one of your operational rhythms of your weekly or monthly or quarterly department meetings, leadership team meetings, planning meetings, etc. So that's what we're going to dive into today. My name is Nathan Austin. I'll be presenting, and behind the scenes is Stephanie Kingsleyan, who's producing, and will be staffing the Q&A. Speaking of which, if you have questions, go ahead. If you have them right now, go ahead and start entering them in there. This is going to be 30 minutes of prescriptive content. And throughout the session, if you have any questions relative to the content, please enter it into the Q&A panel, and we will cover it at the end. And we will wrap up no later than 1 hour from now. So very much looking forward to digging in, and let's get started. So to start, again, the purpose of this session is we have another session that we walk through some of the little bit more of the how-to. I'm going to go relatively quickly on the prescriptive best practices, but I've got some key summary slides. And if anyone's interested in the PowerPoint deck that has those summary slides, let us know. We're happy to share those as well. I'm going to be very prescriptive today on the how-to of some best practices that we've learned as far as solving some of these common problems. The other part of this session is that there's some there's some organizational decisions that really need to be made first or as a pilot to help drive adoption, because if this isn't going to be something that the organization is supporting or the different managers or different team members are supporting, it'll be difficult to drive adoption. So make sure that as an organization, you're choosing to move down this direction. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then some of the common meeting problems that teams can solve. Over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, we've done a lot of training, and it's been pretty fascinating how no matter the size of the organization or the industry that they're in, for-profit or non-profit, we nearly all have the same type of problems when we're running team meetings. So we're going to hit on those key topics. I'm not saying it's going to cover 100% of everything you're trying to do, but it'll cover at least 80%, at least based on our experience. Finally, we'll actually dig in and show you how to do some of these, the Teams meeting best practices and some of the whys behind that. We'll summarize that with some next steps, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So, all right, well, now 1 minute about MyTech. As I like to communicate for those of you who are watching this now or in the future, MyTech is not a training organization. We are a small, medium business technology and consulting organization, where over the last 20 years of being in business, we've developed and learned a lot about a proven IT strategy that we know can achieve consistent results for our clients. We understand that as a business, as an organization, there are a lot of challenges that you all face well outside of IT, and IT cannot solve every problem. We are just hoping that through our collaboration with you, that we can remove some of those IT challenges off your plate, so you can focus on things that are the better, higher and better use of your time, and that enables you to be more adaptable to those challenges that you're facing. So as part of that, when you work with our team, we coach our team to make IT easy for you, our client. Doesn't mean we're perfect at that, doesn't mean we always accomplish that, but that is our goal, and that's what we strive to do. And so we encourage our clients, if we're not achieving that, to please let us know. It's our opportunity to learn. And by working together, we've been able to find that our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. If you want to learn more about that, let us know. But enough about MyTech. Let's dig into the content today. All right. So 2 things we're going to cover before we dig into the demonstration is some organizational decisions and things to go through, to think through as you go down this path. And secondly is some of the common problems that teams can solve. So I covered this as well in the part 1 session, so I'll go a little bit faster today. However, these are some of the kind of steps that I would encourage you to think through. You might be able to consolidate some of them, but I definitely wanted to touch on each one. In general, if your organization is choosing to use Teams, then you've already kind of gotten through the first couple steps, right? One of the challenges we had when we first went down this path, for example, though, and I know other organizations are in the same place, is that we had part of our organization using Slack, part of our organization using Skype, and if we're trying to build a hub from which our team can communicate and collaborate, using two separate tools is not a good place to start. So we had to choose, we are going down the path of using Teams. So that's an example of what I mean by organizationally need to make some decisions. I mean, you might have people using GoToMeeting or Zoom or or Slack or Skype or these different tools. And if you're trying to bring your organization together, choose a tool that's going to help you go down that path and solve your problem. So, and for us, Teams was an easy answer. As Skype, by the way, for business is going away and it's rolling into Teams. It pretty much already is rolled into Teams. So be aware of that. So choose a tool. One of the things I do encourage is identify internal power users. We actually are starting tomorrow. We have our first Friday power user group of the month. It's May 1st. Every first Friday of the month, we're going to be hosting a power user group specifically for those folks in your organization that are able to and are interested in learning a little bit more about how this is all structured, how this all works together, because they will be able to help guide other members of your team and leaders through building the structure that aligns and supports the problems you're trying to solve in your organization. We are, of course, here to help. However, we also know that having somebody internal that has a little bit extra knowledge about that can be really beneficial. We do recommend training your managers, leaders, and supervisors in particular so they can help drive adoption throughout the rest of your organization. But one tip I would like to advise is that one of the things we've found is that there are certain people on your team that have the ability and they are interested in and they like being able to understand the problem you're trying to solve on one side, and those that can see the technology capabilities and they can connect those dots and they really enjoy participating in those conversations. And then you have other members that we found, including in our organization, that don't really want to try and connect those dots. They would rather just be trained on teach me how you want me to use the tool. So if you involve those people in the creation side, they're going to get a little frustrated. So that's just something to be aware of as you're choosing the members that might be part of the initial pilot group or the power users as you're going down that path. Once you have decided what you're trying to do team member training. Depending on the time frame that you have available to you, I would consider using a pilot group, but we were talking to someone just earlier this week and they said we are planning a 3-month rollout period and we basically consolidated that into about 2 weeks because of everybody having to go work from home through this current pandemic. So I understand that we're in uncertain times and that those things might be accelerated, but be aware if you can have a pilot group that can help you vet some of these pieces, that'd be great. But again, that's one of the reasons why we're being very prescriptive in this session. So all else fails, a place to start is just starting with exactly what we're prescribing today to help solve these problems, and then you can iterate from there. And we're going to show you how to build the use and these tools into your daily, weekly, monthly operational rhythm, depending on if you have daily huddles, weekly team meetings, or monthly planning or leadership team meetings. This all works and applies to those scenarios. I would plan on a transition period. For instance, if you're in a position where we're trying to say we have Slack on one side and Skype on the other and moving forward, it does take time for your people to adapt. So just give yourself some grace and have some patience as you're trying to enable your team to be able to adapt to this new normal and to the new solution that you're choosing to roll out. And then put yourself in a position to iterate and improve over time. That's where your power users can really help out. Okay, so that's some organizational things to think through as you're going down this path. Again, this could be a shortened time frame if you've made these decisions, but be aware that if you can go through some of those, it'll help you, I think, drive adoption. All right, so next step, let's talk about common meeting problems that Microsoft Teams can solve. Over the years, we found that people struggle keeping meetings on topic, and so having a standard published agenda helps start that process. Start off with a good agenda as far as knowing what you're going to cover. Keeping track of meeting minutes and notes as meetings happen is also something that people say, well, I typed them up and I was going to send them out, but I didn't. Well, there's a shared place you can do it, so you don't have to worry about forgetting to do that. Team metrics is oftentimes a key component of a department meeting. Also having a centralized issues list where people can post things they want to talk about or challenges they're facing. There might be a parking board. One of the things that we use a parking board for is if there's a topic that comes up where it's something that we want to acknowledge and we do want to work on, but it's not the top priority right now. So we say throw it on the parking board, tag it as such, and then we sit down in our quarterly planning sessions. We're going to pull up that parking board and figure out which is the next highest priority. So the centralized issue list, discussion topics, and parking board could all be similar topics, but you just might put them in different categories depending on how you're working through them as a team. Capturing action items and to-dos is oftentimes a problem that we find that people are trying to keep track of. How do I, as a manager or supervisor, create visibility and accountability for actions and to-dos that's not just on my plate to do, that actually everyone else has visibility as well. Sharing documents, and for those of you who use EOS, or the entrepreneur operating system, one of the core concepts of that is that you rate the meeting to allow yourself to continually improve. So we're going to show some of the tools and some of the capabilities of Teams in O365 that can accomplish, that simply accomplish all those topics and address all those problems that many organizations face when they're running department meetings. Again, forgive me, I am going fast on purpose. We have 30 minutes. I do want to try and pack in as much as possible on this topic and provide as much time for the demonstration. Okay, so now let's go into the demonstration of Teams meeting best practices. So I'm going to pull up Teams here. Again, I'm not going to go over all the basics of Teams for the sake of this session, but what I am going to do is I'm going to use one of our teams that we have not built out this structure yet, and I'll illustrate. We have one of our other teams that we built this out, and I'll show you what that looks like, but I'm going to actually build this out with the marketing team right now. So when you start by a team, so let's say our marketing team, we have a weekly team meeting that we host on whatever time frame, or like on whatever day, I mean. So we start with the general channel, and notice when you have any channel starts with posts, files, and this thing called the wiki. So what I'm going to encourage to start off with the list that we had is let's look at the wiki to make that our meeting notes, meeting agenda and notes. So I'm going to start by calling this our, just right in here, meeting agenda and notes. And then I'm going to title this here our standing meeting agenda, and our content, I'm going to make it really simple. Open, share wins and lessons learned, team metrics, let's see, issue discussion, rate the meeting, and close. Actually, sorry, I need to put in action items here. So this is an example of, actually, I'm going to put action items. Sometimes you discuss action items before or after, but you get the idea. Have the standing meeting agenda. So then what you can do is, so for instance, once you have that standing meeting agenda, and you can decide time frames, for instance, so say like 5 minutes. Maybe you offer this 10 minutes. You can put time frames if that makes sense. And again, you can continue to do that. So then what you have the opportunity of doing is once you hover over this little plus icon here, basically what I encourage is say, all right, so let's say we're having a meeting today. So it's April 30th, not 30th, team meeting. And then what I end up doing is I'll copy and paste the standing meeting agenda into the new meeting, and we start the meeting, and we can keep meeting notes right here. This happened. Okay. So now what I like about this is that when you create this, so now we've accomplished our meeting agenda and meeting minutes and notes right here. Everyone on the marketing team now has access to this section. The one thing I like, if you look at the hamburger icon right over here, it starts building out a table of contents that allows you to, once I add, and if I add the next meeting, notice it'll add it down here. So maybe this is our May, I'm not sure what the Thursday is next week, but I'll say May 8th, I believe, 2020 team meeting. So basically now I can have the content down here, as you see, copy and paste that. So it starts building out a history of meetings as you go along. I could have also added that up here. The other thing, I could have added that up here so it goes in chronological order. So one of the little tips, if you forget to do that, you can actually come over here to the breadcrumbs where it says more options, and you can actually move this whole section up. So now I move this up, so now it goes in chronological order, and then I can add the next meeting here for the May 14th, or whatever date that is, 14th, 2020. You get the idea. So that's one of the things I like about the wiki, how it provides a nice little table of contents and navigation over here. It allows you to publish the standing meeting agenda, which you can adjust if it's going to be the standing meeting agenda, and allows you to keep meeting notes all in the same spot. So one of the other things the last things I would recommend after you built this out is just rename this tab. Click the little drop down up here and hit rename, and I'm going to call this meeting agenda. I'm going to be real creative. Meeting agenda and notes. All right, so now we've gone through and we've created our meeting agenda and notes tab, and everyone can access and reference their meeting agenda and notes. So that's one of the best practices. Okay, so now let's go to team metrics. For the sake of this session, I'm actually just going to show where you might be able to, there's a couple ways you can do it in the files tab or possibly adding as a tab. In a couple of weeks, we're actually going to be highlighting and going through connecting a spreadsheet like this to Power BI so that you can actually visualize these metrics. So in the files tab, I actually have a Excel spreadsheet, marketing team weekly metrics. So I can open that up in Teams if I like, and I can this is a way that we've just created some team metrics that I might be able to populate and add information. I could pull it up that way. I could also use the tab icon over here, and then I could click on an Excel spreadsheet. I want to add Excel and make it a tab. I'm picking the same exact weekly metric and hitting save. And so it basically now, I didn't rename it, but now I'm able to open up that tab as this Excel spreadsheet. The other thing I really like to be able to do is that if you wanted to, you could actually click on the little breadcrumbs over here and you can open up in the browser. That's another thing I like to be able to do because it helps me navigate really easily back and forth between the Teams window and helps me navigate back and forth between the Teams window and other topics. So I can keep the meeting agenda here, and then I can actually have by clicking on the browser tab, I can have the weekly metrics up here. So there's a couple different ways to make sure that that's easily accessible. And again, forgive me, I am going fast, and that's why we are recording it. The other thing I would recommend if you're doing this is I'm going to rename this tab. Just rename it Team Metrics. Again, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be going over how this could be a Power BI dashboard. We'll talk about that later. But you don't have to necessarily make it a tab. You could also just plan on navigating to the file section. You could have that weekly metric in here. The one thing that is nice about having the Excel spreadsheet here is that anyone on your team, if they're responsible for updating their own individual metrics, they can populate it here. You might already have dashboards. So for instance, if you have a dashboard with a third-party tool, you could also go to the tab up here and notice there's a link here to a website. So you could actually just, if you have a URL for that dashboard, you could populate it here by selecting website, or if you're using any of the other tools down here, and I know there's some reporting and dashboard tools like Moodle dashboard, and there's some other ones down here as well, like I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's different ones down here. So if you happen to be using some other third-party tool, you can also oftentimes just add them as a tab to your team meeting. So that way, when you have your team meeting, you basically go across the tabs, and that's roughly your team agenda. All right, so I'm going to go back to the meeting agenda. And the next thing on our agenda as we go to our standard meeting metrics is issue discussion. So one of the things that I highly recommend for issue discussion is using a SharePoint list. Because that is a way to keep track, and you can add custom columns. So I'm going to go to the one of the ways you can navigate to the SharePoint folder or site that's for this team is click on Files, and you can hit Open in SharePoint. So this is actually going to open up the document section of that. So you notice these have got the exact same documents appear here. Forgive me, I'm going to dismiss that. And I'm actually going to go to the Home tab. So you just go to the home of your marketing team or whatever your site is. And when you click on New over here, hit the drop down, and you can create a new list. So I'm going to hit on List. I'm going to call it Issue and Discussion Topics. And I'm just hit create. Now, one of those checkboxes says show in site navigation. Basically, once I click create, it's going to show up the issue and discussion topics will show up in the navigation over here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Notice it shows up in the navigation and it gives me a blank column, a blank issues discussion list. So you can create topics here, but one of the reasons why I like to add columns is you can add, like, for example, who entered this information. So who owns the issue, right? Because how many times have you had an example where someone put something on your issues list and they didn't say that they put it on there, and so you don't know who it is. So this basically says you can put a name to it, person or group, and you can require this column contains information. You could choose to allow multiple selections if people want to, and click save. So now it adds that column, who owns the issue. I also want to know oftentimes, when it was added, so I can sort by the date, right? So I like to know, hey, when was, or date, I'll just put date added. Because oftentimes I want to sort by the oldest items first to make sure that we can get it through. So the default value, I can actually choose today's date. So that's what I'm going to do, and click save. Actually, I'm going to click more options because I do want this to require information. So I'm going to click yes. So I click more options, and then it requires information. Click save. So now I have the title of the issue, who owns the issue, and the date added. The last thing I'm going to do is add a column to identify is it open, a different drop down, because I want to allow choices, because I want to add, is this an category, right? Of issue. So now what I want to do is say I want to make a choice, and is this an open issue? Have we completed it? Is it available? Is it a parking board item? Like, are we going to park it? And just just say, and those are kind of the three things I like to have. So I can say, is this an open issue that we can talk about? Is it completed? So we're done with it, we don't delete it, or is it something that we're just parking for later? So that's something that I put there. I do not want to allow people to add values manually, and the default, I can choose the default. I'm going to choose open is typically what I end up doing, and more options. I also want to, I can choose if it's a drop down or radio buttons, and I'm just going to say to require that it contains information. Again, you can customize all of these, and if you click add column, you've got a lot of different choices here that you can choose from, but the idea is here now I can click new item, and I want to say when are we having a team happy hour. I can start adding my name. It's gonna pull me, the date added. It's an open issue. I can choose to add attachments or not, and I can click save. And so now it populates this. And so in my team meeting, I encourage your team to say, anyone on the team to say, hey, if you have an issue, don't wait till the team meeting to add it. Go ahead during the week and click on it. So you can create the issue list right here. Once you create the list, you can add it to your teams. So I'm going to go back into Teams and show you. You can go back. So I'm in the marketing team general. I'm going to add the plus column here, and I'm going to go into SharePoint because the list is in SharePoint. And when I click on SharePoint, it's going to give me the option. Do I want to add a page? And notice this tab over here, I can actually choose lists. So I'm going to click on lists. And notice it'll give me the list that I just created, issue and discussion topics. I'm going to select that, hit save. And so now I have that exact same issues and discussion list right here inside of Teams. So from now moving forward, your team doesn't have to go there. They could just click new, and they could choose to enter their value whenever they're ready. They can say having a problem with procurement. All right, who owns the list? Maybe that's Stephanie. Right, date added, it's open, and we can click save. And now that issue is on there. It's owned by Stephanie, and we now have a list from which we can go through. This also, when you have this category, defaults to open. But let's say, for instance, we talked about this issue. I'm going to edit this one, and I'm going to say we completed it. All right, so I'm going to save that. I know I'm moving quickly, but then what that allows us to do is this little filter icon up here. I can click on it and say, I only want to look at things I want to see by who owns the issue. I could also choose to say, well, I only want to look at open issues. Now, the completed issue goes away, but it's still there for future reference if I want to. So that's one of the things I like about being able to use the issues list, is because you can filter by different categories, by people, by date, as well as by open or completed or parking board items. So that was one of my best practices as far as a centralized issue list, topics, discussion, and parking board. And now I want to move to the next step of action items and tracking to-dos. So one of the ways to do that is using Microsoft Planner. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go right into this tab. By the way, public service announcement, they Microsoft just noted that they're going to be renaming Planner, I think, to something like Tasks. So stay tuned for that. But I'm going to add the Planner tab here. And it's going to ask me, do I want to create a new plan or use an existing plan? For now, because I'm creating from new, I'm going to create a new plan. I'm going to say Action Items. Click Save. Now what this is going to do, it's going to create a new plan for the marketing team. It's going to apply all the permissions to the marketing team. And then if, for instance, out of that discussion list, we identified that Stephanie is going to work on the procurement, we can add the task, say work with procurement. And we can set a due date. That's going to be, let's move it, give Stephanie a week to work on that. And we're going to assign it to Stephanie. There we go. And I'm going to add that task. And now Stephanie has received a notification. She's got a due date. And if we need to, we can also click into it and say a couple sub items, work with accounting, coordinate with distribution, etc. So now, I notice I misspelled that. Accounting. So there's different, then you can have sub bullets, and I'm going to click this little icon up here that says show on card. Notice it'll actually populate over here, show on card. So now we have an issue that is assigned to Stephanie. It's got some sub items, it's got a due date, she knows that it's assigned to her, everyone on the team knows it's assigned to her, and we could be assigning tasks to different members of the team. So that's how you can very easily add a tab. Notice I didn't even have to go into the Planner application. I was able to just go in and add a tab, click on Planner, create a new one, and start with to-do lists, and it creates and it assigns tasks to individuals on the team. Now, by default, it's only going to allow you to assign tasks to members of the team, because when you create a plan from within here, it automatically permissions the right people that are already part of the team to Planner. Okay, so the last, collaborating on files, we already talked about that. So just using the Files tab to collaborate on those files and sharing those within the team. I also like that you can just click on here to open in SharePoint. So if you need to create an additional folder structure or anything like that, you can also collaborate here in SharePoint. That's just a simple way to do team collaboration on those documents. The last thing that I'll show you relative to the team is forms. So for instance, as I mentioned, if you are part of EOS, or if you like to rate the meeting, or maybe there's some other rating you'd like to do, you're seeing a trend here. Click on the plus icon over here. You can use Microsoft Forms. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a shared form, and it's going to be called Rate the Meeting. Save. So it's creating a form. Of course, I misspelled it. That's going to do that up there, but I can rename that. Rate the meeting, enter description. This is to rate how we did on our weekly team meeting. And I'm going to add a new question. It's going to be, I want to do a rating, and I'm going to choose the levels I want all the way to level 10. And I want the symbol to be a number, not a star. The question is just going to be a name. So I want it to be Nate. And then the other thing I can do, I can add a new, or if I want this model, I can actually come up here and hit copy. So that saves you some time. And then this one can be Stephanie. And basically see it copies that. Now granted, now I basically have two questions that I can ask. The only other thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add a new question that I want to be text, because I like to be able to ask if there's any feedback. Right? And I want this to be a long answer, which basically enables us to have a long text answer if possible. It is not required, and that is, and I'm actually going to move this question down because I want Stephanie and I to rate, and then the feedback. So now I've created a simple form with questions. There are no responses yet, but now that's saved. Actually, what I want to be able to do, I didn't want to do it that way, but here I'll show you one thing really quick. You can basically go into the tab. I'm going to click forms again. So notice that added the form to the meeting, but it added the form from a standpoint of being able to edit. But once I select the existing form, it allows me to collect responses or show results. So actually, I want to collect responses. So I'm going to add the tab, forgive me, as I go along. And then I'm going to remove the other tab here, this other tab that I created. I'm going to remove this one. Yep, I'm going to remove it. It doesn't delete it, just removes the tab. And then when I click on this one, notice how it just gives me the ability to rate the meeting. So I can come in here and say I rated an 8, Stephanie rates it a 9. You can say good meeting, started and ended on time. And then I can hit submit. And so now it adds that, and I can submit another response. Next time I come to this, it basically allows me to rate the meeting. If I want to see the results, I can actually add that as well to see the results tab. So now we've gone through best practices of a team meeting, and so we basically have gone through organizational decisions. We've chosen to use Teams, and we've built out some best practices around train the trainer, did a pilot group, defined all these things. And the Teams best practices, I put a little summary here: meeting agenda and notes, go to the wiki. Teams meeting metrics, you can use a shared document like that Excel spreadsheet, or in a couple of weeks we'll cover Power BI. Centralized issues list by creating a SharePoint list, and you can create custom columns for things like topics, open and closed, and parking board items. You can use Planner for tracking action items and to-do. Now again, that's going to move to, I think they're calling it tasks. There's an announcement that was just made this morning. And then you can use shared documents in the file tab or by browsing to the SharePoint site. And then you can build a form to be able to rate the meeting and incrementally improve how you're operating over time. So those are the key action items, and we can provide this information as a summary. So identify those problems you're trying to solve. If there's a couple things you've taken away from today, write them down. Try and take some baby steps in the near future. And join us as next week we're actually going to dig into more to Microsoft Forms, because a whole bunch more you can do with Microsoft Forms that we didn't even touch on today. We're also covering Microsoft Stream next week, being able to do recordings and video recordings for your team and training recordings, as well as tomorrow we have our first Friday Power User Group for Microsoft O365 and Teams. So join us for those future events. Thank you very much for attending today, and I appreciate, for those who have to sign off, thank you very much. The recording will be available later, as well as we'll send you a follow-up email later today. And for the rest of you who are still here, can stick around. Let's open it up for questions to get those answered. Stephanie.
Awesome, thanks, Nate. First question we have is, in the wiki, you use a single page for all meeting notes and then add subheaders for each meeting. Is there a reason that this would be considered best practice rather than having a new page per meeting? It feels like it could get extremely long over time.
Yeah, that is a great point, and it can. So I think the short answer to that is just it's personal preference. One of the other ways that you could consider organizing it is you can do a new page, and maybe you call the new page May team meetings, and that way you might then be able to have subsections for that. One of the other ways I've seen new pages be used is for training meetings. So you might have different types of meetings that you have with your team. So like, for instance, this might be your weekly meeting agenda notes. Then you might just have monthly, like different monthly sections, training sections. I've also seen where you might have a page called planning meetings. Sorry, as it clicks. So these are just different ways in which you can manage that, and each page then you could have subsections, and each time you add a section, it's going to add respective sections here. So however you feel you want to organize that, it's really up to you. But these are some of the ways I've seen it, like maybe having, instead of just a long running, because yeah, if you have a year's worth of meetings, you're going to have 52 items to scroll through when you do that. So maybe you want to break it down by year. Maybe you want to break it down by quarter or month, or maybe you want to break it down by different topics, like here are training sessions that we want to be able to run. So we're going to keep a running list of training meetings we do, or when we do our monthly or quarterly planning or annual planning meetings, depending on your frequency, maybe you keep those in here as well and have a different standing agenda for those different sessions. I know, for example, for our leadership, our strategic team that we have together, we have an agenda for our annual planning. We have an agenda for our quarterly check-ins. They're different than our monthly check-ins. So we have different agendas, and so this is how we're actually building that out as far as annual agenda, quarterly agenda, and monthly agenda, so we can kind of segment the actual specifics of the standing agenda are different for the annual, quarterly versus monthly. So those are other examples of the way you can use the wiki. Again, personal preference. So good question, and it just is up to you.
Awesome, thank you. The next one we have here is, I'll just read it from them. It says, so I believe, but I will confirm, or sorry, back up. There we go. I know you covered this in one of your previous sessions, but I haven't found a clear understanding regarding collaborating on a file in a private channel, then posting it to a general channel. Does the file then take on the permissions in the general channel or retain the permissioning from the private channel?
Yeah, so Great question. So one of the things that there's really two scenarios that if I understand the question correctly, that you're really asking about. So for instance, and I'll illustrate. I think I've got a couple illustrations here. Yeah. So for instance, I'm going to open up a couple teams that I've got over here. So one of the previous sessions we talked about having a team that could be a subset of your organization that is responsible for iterating and updating and changing production documents. But while before they're in production or as you're iterating, you don't want to be iterating a production document. So you want to have a space where you can collaborate on that before you move that document to a production space. So there's a couple ways to do that. So one, you could have a team. This is what this is designed to be, as an example of members that they can have documents in here from which you're collaborating. Or, as the question was, you could have a private channel. And notice there's a little lock next to this channel here. It means it's private. So it means it's a subset of the operations team, but I have to choose who's a member of it because not all operations team members are going to be a member. So the question in either the scenario, here's the answer. If you share a link to the document that exists in either a team that someone doesn't have permission to or a private channel that someone doesn't have permission to, I could basically come in here. I don't think I have any documents in here. I don't. I believe I do. I do here. So for instance, if I came in here, for instance, and I said, hey, I want to share this document in this team, and I was able to say here, I want to click, or I want to copy the link to this file. I can just go right up here. And so I can click copy. Now this document permissions, because exists inside the change advisory board. And if I wanted to share this document and I go, let's say I'm going into the marketing team, the team that we were just in today, and I were to say, here is a link to the shared document. Or production document, whatever, you get the idea. One of the things that I like to be able to do as a little tip is that if you click on, I could either do this, which creates a nice long weird string. That was just paste, by the way. I'm going to delete that out, but I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to click on this little A down here because it gives me more text editing, and then there's a little link icon up here, so I can insert that link right here. Hit insert. So now this actual the words are now linked just like a hyperlink, and I can click send. And so if Stephanie did not have access to the change advisory board, because this is just a link to the document that exists in here, she will, even though I shared it in the marketing team that she does have access to, she would not be able to actually access the document because the permissions will go to where the document lives. So because you shared it from here, the permissions will flow from where you shared it, if that makes sense. So really from a change management methodology, once you have vetted a document, and let's go back here, and we've determined like the changes that we've made here are ready to go in production. Well, what I would recommend is now you actually either make this a PDF or make this a Word document template, and then you move it to the you make a copy of it basically, or you convert it to a PDF or to a document template, and then you move it to the respective production place. So that way the documents as they live here or in the private channel are your master files or your master documents, and you can make changes to them without affecting the people that are using them in production. And until you're ready to release those changes into production, you keep them in their respective spot. And then once you're ready, you either PDF them or move them to a document template, and then you save those documents into the production place. So we have a whole session on that, but that's the whole point, is because ideally, if if you're publishing a document, very often you iterate that document. You might make a change next month or the month after that or the month after that. And so you might want to keep the product. And you might make that suggested change, and you might have a collaboration or approval process. Well, while you're going through that collaboration or approval process, you don't want to confuse the rest of your team with a production document that's actually not ready because you've made changes to it without communicating it. So that's the idea and the concept behind it. So more to come on that though in future sessions. We will have future sessions that dig in deeper, but we also have a recorded session where we cover that as well.
Awesome, thank you.
Hopefully that answered the question.
The next question is, in Planner, Do all of the active plans for a specific team show in the same place? For example, I have 2 plans for my program team. Is there a space in Planner that sorts those 2 plans by my team, separate from any other plans I have with other teams?
I believe the answer to that, short answer is no. So I believe, so I'm going to open, I have Planner open up here. So the way Planner, I think the question is, does it separate, would Planner separate that? The only thing that you could do is you could favorite a plan. So for instance, I think you can actually select that and make it a favorite by clicking this little icon here. So now what you can do is, like, if these are your team and you wanted to have those as favorites, you can choose to favorite them or not. And notice how it popped down here. So if I wanted these different ones as favorites, I could choose to do that. And that way it keeps it there, but you only see the plans that you have access to. So for instance, if your team and the members of your team only had those 2 plans that they were working with, that's all the 2 plans they would see. But if you go to Planner Hub, that's where you're going to see recent plans or all plans. And again, you're only going to see the plans to which you have access. And if you notice this column, I went to the browser version of Planner because that's where I will have this column. If I access Planner inside of Teams, for instance here, this is our Teams tab on here. Oops, sorry, that's not Teams. That's this is action items. It's opening up Planner, and I only see the production columns, so to speak. I don't see this column over here. So if I click into here, this is kind of what I'm seeing, right? So I think that answers the question. Is that the short answer is no, there's not a place where it only shows just the plans for your team unless you've added them as tabs in your team channel, which you could do, or you could actually favorite those, and that way they'd show up really easy for your team. And the team's announcement of making the name change, by the way, is because they're doing more to integrate like team visibility like this into To-Do. So that's also where your individual team members would have access to their individual tasks that are assigned to them that integrate with Planner as well. So hopefully that answers the question. I believe it did.
Awesome, thanks. And I'm just double checking here, but I believe that is all the questions that we have today.
All right, excellent. So just as a summary, this is, we've been using Teams as an organization for a couple years at least, and we still are working to drive adoption across different departments, different roles in the organization. And so it's something where give yourself some grace and patience. But I think the best place to start, and some of the power of using Teams and To-Do and Planner, by the way, as we talked about here, is that, for instance, if I'm a member of one team, or if I'm a member of multiple teams, which a lot of your managers and supervisors and department heads are, if every team that they're a part of uses Planner, then it's very easy for them to keep track of all their to-dos, as opposed to one department using a spreadsheet, one department using notes, one department using a Word document, one department using Planner. It's really hard for those individuals then to aggregate all of their to-dos and then accomplish them and work on them. So part of this process is if across your organization, that's why it's important to make those organizational decisions. If across your organization you're choosing to use the same tools in at least similar methods, you're going to make it easy for your department managers as well as your team members to be able to execute and manage and participate in team meetings. And by doing that, guess what? You're really getting your team used to using these tools, and you will start driving adoption by just using Teams as part of your team meeting structure. So thank you everyone for attending. I look forward to future sessions, and yeah, stay safe and stay healthy out there.